Hello.
Hello, Karen. Let's see, we need your video on. There you are. Okay, perfect, perfect. Okay, well, um, I'm Blue Star Dear Woman of the One Network, and today I'm honored to be having an interview with Karen Lambie, who's contacting us from Georgia. And she's holding, I'm going to go to one of your titles, which is the Ambassador of Hope for the Shared Hope International
Yes.
Ambassadors. And Karen has a Ph.D. in educational psychology. And the topic today is sex trafficking. And the reason I invited Karen for this interview is that we can readily see that sexuality is coming to the forefront in all the disclosures that are happening on this planet. And I remembered having conversations with Karen in the past and knew that she would be a very important being to have present with us, and hopefully, not hopefully, I know, will raise consciousness about this issue on the planet, and especially I want to address is, especially for the children, how parents
Yes.
and guardians can take preventative measures for them and keep them safe. So I welcome you, Karen. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. You are so welcome. So, Karen, maybe you could begin with just, share with us um, how you began to do this work, what called you to it, and just let it flow.
Okay. Well, actually, I was a teacher for 32 years, and I knew several years before I retired that when I did have the opportunity to retire, I would still be, you know, fairly young. And so I wanted to essentially dedicate the rest of my life to speaking out against issues that I believe are extreme violations of human rights. And so I got hooked up with some people online, some online communities and groups that were dedicated to children's rights issues and women's rights issues. And I knew a little bit about human trafficking, but I didn't know the extent to which it happens right here in the United States and how prevalent it still is in the world. And so I began reading. I have been in touch with some survivors of sex trafficking, and I felt the more I learned, the stronger I felt that I needed to get involved, not just educate myself about this fast-growing crime, but I wanted to get I wanted to raise awareness. I wanted to make parents and teachers and counselors and really anyone that I could reach, I wanted to make them aware of this problem, what is happening, why it's happening, who the victims are, and especially what we can do to help our children stay safe.
All right, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And maybe what you could share with us for those that perhaps don't have that understanding, exactly what is sex trafficking?
Yes, well, actually, human trafficking is a form of modern day slavery. Sex trafficking is a part of it. And what happens is traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to exploit their victims. Besides sex trafficking, there is also labor trafficking, which can include people being forced to work in the agricultural industry, the coffee industry, chocolate industry, making clothing, working in the agricultural industry, hotels, restaurants. Um, and then there's also the sex trafficking, where victims are either exploited for prostitution or pornography or both. And sometimes a person can be a victim of both labor trafficking and sex trafficking as well. Trafficking, as far as we know, occurs in probably every country on this planet. It is estimated that between 25 million and 30 million people at this moment are actually enslaved in some form of trafficking. The large majority of trafficking is sex trafficking, and sex trafficking often involves children. And in fact, the average age of a sex trafficked female in this country is 13.
Okay.
The average age of a sex trafficked male in this country is 12.
Right, right. And I wanted to ask you, Karen, what do you think brought this to the forefront? How did the origins of this being brought into the public eye happen? Do you know any of that history?
Well, I think that people just started realizing that this was happening. One thing, if I can just share a little bit about Shared Hope International and how that got started. Linda Smith is the founder of Shared Hope International, and it started in 1998, and at that time she was a congresswoman. She actually went to India and discovered, she was in a so-called red light district in India, and saw that the streets were lined with children. And she wanted to do something about that. So she came back to this country and started Shared Hope International. And as the organization got up and running, they did some research projects and discovered that it doesn't just happen in far off places like India, but it is happening right here in the United States. And as more people and organizations got on board and started doing more research, it was discovered that it essentially is rampant in this country. And so, people started speaking out about it. And that's one of the things that I do. I've had the opportunity now to speak to several different groups here in the state of Georgia to raise awareness. So I believe that, people are beginning to wake up. They're beginning to realize that it can literally happen right in your own neighborhood. It can happen right under your nose. And if you don't know the signs to look for, you may not know that it's happening. Now, the numbers of people who are being exploited are kind of hard to come by. And it is believed that the numbers that we do have are just scratching the surface because of the hidden nature of this crime. It is an underground, clandestine operation. So we may just be, when we talk about numbers, we may just be scratching the surface.
Right. Have we been able to make any significant connections to the amount of children that have been missing each year?
Probably a lot of children who are missing are victims of sex trafficking. It is estimated in this country that between 100,000 and 300,000 children are either exploited or are at risk of being exploited at any one time in this country.
Okay.
Also, we know that between 14,000 and 17,000 people, and many of those people are children, are brought into this country from other countries. And many of those victims are brought here for sex trafficking.
Right. And you just mentioned that there are telltale signs. Can you speak to some of those, of when this is obvious, apparent in a community?
Yes, for sex trafficking, one thing that, or some of the things that parents and teachers and guidance counselors and administrators need to look for are sudden changes in a child's behavior, a sudden drop in their grades, if they are involved in like extracurricular activities and all of a sudden they don't want to do those anymore, they show no interest, that can be a sign. Also, if they start showing up with new clothes, electronics, jewelry, things like that. If they have all of a sudden, if they have tattoos that they have not had before, that can be a sign, because one thing that traffickers do is they brand their victims. These tattoos can be like gang symbols. They can be the name, the first name of the trafficker. They can be things like daddy's girl. Sometimes the tattoos are even on the inside of the lip. And this is to show other traffickers who the victim belongs to. Also, if children are absent from school a lot, or if they tend to run away from home. So these are some signs that parents can look for. However, if I could just tell a brief story, one of the books that I read is called The Slave Across the Street. And this was written by a woman whose name is Teresa Flores. When she was 15 years old in Detroit, Michigan, she became a victim of sex trafficking through blackmail. And she was living at home with both of her parents. She had 3 little brothers. Her parents realized by her behavior that something was very wrong. But because of the threats from her traffickers, she was scared to death to tell anybody. And she lived right there at home. Like I said, her grades started to drop. They saw a change in her behavior. They got counseling for her, but she was afraid to even tell the counselor what was happening to her. So, there are signs that people can look for. Also, if you are ever out in public and you see a child or a young person who seems to be under the control of an older person, and if that child or young people show signs of like maybe withdrawal, depression, or if they appear to be nervous or anxious, if they seem to be afraid to look you in the eye, that can be a sign that that child or young person is a victim. Some other signs are if an individual seems to have very restricted movement, like if they seem to not be allowed to leave their home or their place of business, that can also be a sign. And if you see, bruises or like marks around the wrist or the ankles, like the person has been tied up, those can also be signs.
As you're saying this, it makes me wonder if any art therapists have worked with the children, if there's images that are being presented. Are the children communicating in other ways than verbal that you know of?
Other than body language that you would want to look out for, like, if they seem to be actually afraid to look around, and as I mentioned, afraid to look a person in the eye, if they seem to be anxious, nervous, or severely or depressed, those can be signs. But what happens, these children and other adult victims are afraid to let other people know. They're afraid to try to run from the situation because of the psychological controls that these traffickers have over their victims. They use threats. They use violence. They use threats of violence against the victims' families. And if a victim has children, they will threaten to hurt or kill the children. And the young woman that I mentioned who became a victim in Detroit had 3 little brothers and a family dog, and her family was threatened. Her brothers' lives were threatened by her traffickers, and they even did end up killing the family dog. So,
and how did that survivor finally become a survivor?
The way that she got out of her situation is simply that her father got a job in another state and the family moved.
Wow.
But she was a victim for 2 years, and what they were holding over her head were photographs. She was actually, she came from a very strong Catholic family, and so she was saving herself for marriage or for the person that she knew that she would end up marrying. Well, she had an older boyfriend and went to his house one day, and what happened was he actually raped her. And while this was taking place, one of his cousins was in the home and taking pictures. And they showed her the photographs and said that we will take these to your parents. We will show your dad's boss. And then there were the threats to her family members, and she felt that the only way that she could save her family was to follow what they wanted her to do, which was they would send a car to her house after everyone else had gone to bed, and she would be taken sometimes to a residence, sometimes to a hotel, and there would be, the men there who were paying her traffickers to have sex with her. They would take her back home. She would get up the next morning and go to school.
Right. So, Karen, in your experience, especially from your psychology background, what kind of process is going on in these individuals? What are the issues that are a result of this that they have to come face to face with?
Well, if a victim is fortunate enough to be rescued, they will have sometimes all kinds of medical problems. They may have internal injuries from repeated rapes. A lot of females go through forced abortions if they get pregnant. They may have sexually transmitted diseases. Some of them are HIV positive. So they have the physical medical issues. Mm-hmm. They have severe psychological trauma. They have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Mm-hmm. They have flashbacks. They have nightmares. They suffer from severe depression, from anxiety, from panic attacks. They also suffer, many of them, from dissociative personality disorder. Mm-hmm. And so we need, people who are specially trained to deal with the psychological problems that these victims have. They also have memory lapses. Mm-hmm. And sometimes some of these symptoms don't actually even show up until it can be like a few months after they have actually been rescued. They also need things like job training so that they eventually can become financially independent and get back on their feet and get back to society.
I just had a thought. I'm just wondering, out of the survivors, do you know if any of them are found to have the chips put in their bodies, the chips that we're hearing about now that are part of mind control? Do you happen to?
I have not heard of anything. I'm not aware of anything like that.
Okay. And also, I want to take this moment for those that are watching and sharing this. I know that right now my emotional self is going through lots of feelings.
Yes.
And so I just want to take a moment for everyone to just take a deep breath. Goddess, and you have to love us. And find that space within that, where our power and our strength and our courage is. That it's important to allow ourselves to have our emotional responses. It's important to feel the sadness, feel the grief, feel the anger, and just breathe in and out with that and let the body sensations just allow that to release. Because we need to be in our power.
Yes.
And we have to have courage and we have to have emotional maturity to be able to look at these other areas of disclosure happening on our planet so that we can be powerful and impactful in going forward with what is needed to be done.
Exactly. And one thing that I do when I do go to speak to audiences, I tell them in the beginning that, that I wish that I were here to tell you how to grow a better flower garden. But, unfortunately, that is not my message. However, even though this message is very depressing, it is one of despair, I also tell audience members that I am here as well to deliver a message of hope.
Yes, yes.
And part of that, the hope is through educating, raising awareness, about this crime, and teaching people what we can do that we need to teach our children and our young people about this, even though it's a difficult subject to talk about.
Right. Well, I wondered, the organization is Shared Hope International Ambassadors. I'm curious, is the organization starting to connect the dots to that, all right, this is their particular focus right now, and it's a disclosure, all right? But is the organization starting to connect the dots to all the disclosures on the planet in any way? Are they starting to recognize, the deceptive government and how things have been planfully put in place, which of course trafficking is part of that?
To my knowledge, I don't think that at this time they are connecting those dots.
Okay, okay. And that would be my hope. I mean, as a member of the One Network, one of the things that this group is doing is they are very efficient dot connectors. And so that's why we can embrace conversations of disclosure in any nature, way, and form. However, it is important to us to, in the raising and the shifting of global consciousness, that we start to recognize that every thread, every incident on our planet that is not in resonant harmony with our heartful vision is all going back to what we call the cabal, or we call the Illuminati, but it's all going back to a very small group of people. And I think getting that global picture is what's empowering us as a planet. It's like it's empowering each of the subject areas working together.
Right.
So that's why I brought that up.
Yes, it's all interconnected. And yes, and people need to be aware.
So in your raising of consciousness, how well are the educational institutions receiving the information? Like, you're basically approaching them and saying, hey, let's educate the children, right? Educate the parents.
Yes. I'm glad you asked me that question because about a week ago, I was invited to speak to some parents of middle school children. And one thing that Shared Hope International has done is they have produced a DVD called Chosen. And they actually made the DVD to be shown not just to the parents and the adults, but also to be shown to the not young children, but at least to the teenagers, which would include a lot of middle school children. And when the superintendent of schools saw the trailer for the DVD, it was decided that I could come and speak to parents. And I showed them the DVD. One thing that I do tell parents, I use what I call my rattlesnake analogy. And that is, I tell parents, you wouldn't send your child on a camping trip out into the woods in the spring or summer of the year without explaining to them about rattlesnakes. You would want them to know what a rattlesnake looks like, what a rattlesnake sounds like. You would want them to know the type of harm that could befall them if they encounter a rattlesnake and what to do if they do find a rattlesnake. Well, educating your children about traffickers is, I think, even more important than explaining to them about rattlesnakes if they're going out into the woods. And also, we start talking to children who are very young about good touch, bad touch. We talk about stranger danger to young children. Talking to them about human traffickers goes even, a little bit beyond that. But we need to start talking to our children at a young age. We don't want to scare them to death. Don't want them to be, scared to death to go out into the world.
Right.
But what I tell parents is that by talking to children and young people, we are making them smarter. We're giving them an informed, fear, if you want to use the word fear, but it's an intelligent fear. They need to know the tactics that are often used by traffickers to keep themselves safe. They also need to know things like you never, ever get into a vehicle with a person who doesn't know, that you don't know, even if that person tells you that they know them. Now, the reason I tell this story, this happened to a teenage girl who lives about 15 miles down the road from where I live. A group of men pulled up next to her. She was out walking, told her they were relatives of hers and they were going to go visit so-and-so. She believed them, got in the car with them. They gave her a Coke that had a drug in it. She didn't know that, of course. She drank the Coke. 3 days later, she woke up in a hotel room in another city, had no idea where she was. But some would say, by the grace of God, she found her cell phone, called 911. The police were able to track her phone, find her, rescue her, and return her to her family. I live in a very small town. This happened in a tiny little community. You can barely even call it a town. Like I said, 15 miles from where I'm sitting.
Right.
So, I mean, just simple things like saying, even if the people in the car know your name.
Yes. Well, you're bringing up. There's two things that you said that I'd like to respond to.
Sure.
One of them is when you said intelligent fear, and I think that's a really important point, because when I'm working with individuals and working on the healing of our emotional selves, I've come to recognize that fear is an essential and very pure emotional response. It's the associations that we've put with fear that made us say, oh no, if you're afraid, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. Fear is bad, 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 bad. And it's not. It's the association to it. Fear is our mechanism for alerting us that there's something we need to pay attention to. And so I think that's a really significant tool that across the board applies to everything in life, is that not only fear, but even grief, loss. We associate it with something and we think, oh, that's not good, this isn't good. But actually, even if you do a cleansing diet, you grieve in the cleanse. And that's another part of our emotional self that it's totally fine to do that. It's very healthy. And again, I love the association of the word intelligent fear. That seems to me like you can almost write that on the chalkboard, if we even use chalkboards anymore in the classroom. Intelligent fear, what that is. And you could even probably follow the science and the anatomy through the body of how it stimulates the brain. Intelligent fear probably releases endorphins or what have you. And there you have this complete and holistic balance. The other point that I wanted to respond to is that, yes, at an early age, I don't think I was more than 7 or 8. I was approached by an offender in a car, calls me over, and there he is, he's exposed and what have you. And I knew enough not to engage any further, but when I went into the house and said to my mother that something strange had happened, and then of course she immediately calls the police. I remember one of the things that I wish I had had more knowledge about is I didn't know how to communicate what had happened to me. I knew that my parents were pretty prudish about the topic of sexuality. You know, and everybody was, you know, that typical over modest with exposing their bodies to even the family members. And so I didn't have a vocabulary.
That, yes.
Okay, and so the next thing I know, I'm in the company of a cop, you know, an officer in uniform, and I was like, and I'm supposed to talk to this stranger about something that nobody around me talks about.
Yes.
So go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually, um, what what I feel very strongly that we need to do when we need, and I know that this is a very controversial issue too, as far as our parents and school systems are concerned, is in sex education. We need to teach children correct terminology for the parts of our body, instead of using like what I would call maybe like baby terms, you know, your pee or whatever. You need to teach children the correct, when, I mean, you know, when they're old enough to start learning about these things, and they are learning about these things at a very, very early age, whether parents want to you know, admit to that or realize it, but you need to teach correct terminology so that if something happens to a child, they can say, you know, this man, you know, did this or showed me this, or this is what this person did to my body.
Yeah.
So you know, we need more open communication with our children about correct sexual terms, you know, correct terms for genitalia, and those kinds of things. And I know, yes, these are very sensitive. It's a very sensitive area to talk about, but you know, these things are happening, and so
Right.
we use correct terminology for other kinds of things. You know, for names of food and names of animals, and
Right.
so.
Well, also, what's coming to mind is, does your organization do any research in the area of media, what the TV and internet visuals that are affecting our children?
Yes. And let me say one thing about that, because that brought something to my mind. It is estimated that 3 out of 4 victims of sex trafficking are actually contacted initially via the internet.
Okay.
So that's another thing that we need to teach our children is, you know, because I mean, I am not a computer savvy person, but when I was teaching, if I had a computer problem, all I had to do was ask one of my kids, you know. So they're in chat rooms, they're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and I don't even know what all is out there. But the traffickers are online and they are watching your children.
Right.
So, but now, yes, I have been concerned. I know that there have been a lot of research done on how the media affects children. And yes, the graphic images of violence that we see, we know that children who watch violence compared to children who do not watch violence, the children who are exposed to the violence will play a lot more violently. And these are young children that we're talking about. And so they are absolutely affected by what they see on television, on the internet. And of course, that brings up the issue of pornography. And pornography is part of sex trafficking what a lot of people do not realize is that a lot of so-called prostitutes and porn stars are actually being forced to do what they're doing. It is estimated that anywhere from 95 to 98% of the prostitutes are actually not prostitutes, they are prostituted victims, and they want out of it. It was not their choice. They're also they will be thrown into the porn industry, and people will say, well, it looks like these people are, enjoying what they're doing. No, that's acting. One of the sex trafficking survivors that I have gotten very close to over the last few months was prostituted, and she was also in porn. And she talks about her experiences of being at the porn studio and, having to act like you're enjoying this experience and actually being in severe pain. And yeah, but absolutely the media plays a part in all of this.
Yeah, okay. Well, with that question, what would you say are the two top themes that your organization gives most attention to?
Yes, probably those would be raising awareness, and then actually working with victims that have been rescued. One of their big missions is to restore victims of sex trafficking and get them back on their feet.
And what are they finding are the most successful therapies or techniques for that?
They are actually, let's see, I think on one of their websites, you can go to Shared Hope International and you can read about the different therapy techniques. Since my particular field is educational psychology, I'm not familiar with a lot of these techniques, but certainly one thing that they do try to do with these victims is to, like you were talking about, being afraid to go there. They do try to get the victims to bring up memories that are very painful and deal with those memories.
Right.
And I feel that I'm a little bit inadequate in that particular area of actually working with victims to help them psychologically overcome the severe abuse that they have experienced.
Okay.
But that is one area that Shared Hope International is working in.
All right. Fair enough. And while you're doing the presentations, is there any particular group that is more open to the information you're sharing than others?
I haven't really found that there is one particular group that is more open, but I will say this. I have been invited to speak to several churches. It does seem that there are a lot of churches, at least in my area, that really are concerned with this issue, and they really want to get involved.
Do you think it has anything to do with what's going on with the Vatican and the clergy now all being flushed out?
Yeah, that's I don't
No.
I don't know
Yeah.
if it's that or if it's just that a lot of these churches want to get involved in different kinds of like charitable operations and help people out in any way that they can.
Right. Right. So what direction might you be going in? Do you have projects that you're planning to fulfill, and if you might share more of where you're going now with.
Yes, actually, I have not really started this, but I do have an idea for a book that I would like to write. It would sort of be like maybe a manual or a guidebook or something like that for specifically for people like parents and people who work with children and young people, teachers, counselors, administrators. And I would want to have a section in the book um, just for foster parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also want to have a section that parents can use to share with their children information that I strongly feel needs to be shared with children. And one of the things that I really haven't touched on, if I can just mention for a couple of minutes, are the tactics that traffickers use.
Mm-hmm.
This is another thing that people need to be aware of, especially our children and young people. And that is most victims are not kidnapped off of the street, although that does happen occasionally. That does happen. But more often than not, the trafficker will befriend the victim. The trafficker will zero in on what that child needs or wants. And I did mention foster children. There are certain populations of children that are at particular risk for trafficking. And anytime you are dealing with a child that has low self-esteem, that has already been sexually abused, when you're looking at children who are living in poverty and also runaways, these children are at particular risk. In fact, one estimate is that about 80% of trafficked children in this country are runaways. I have spoken to I've spoken at several conferences just for foster and adoptive parents.
Mm-hmm.
So they will make these children feel like they're loved. You know, all of us as human beings, we're all looking for love, for acceptance, for affirmation. Children want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to feel validated, and that's what these traffickers are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then after this, what they call this is the grooming process. Then the trafficker may come to them and say, you know what? I'm in a little bit of trouble here. I could lose my house, my car.
Mm-hmm.
I need for you to do me a favor just this one time.
Right.
And the young person is in love with this person. Yeah, I'll be happy to help you out. Well, so then they may be prostituted and then they're trapped.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the threats of violence, the psychological abuse from the trafficker, that's when that starts. And then the victims are afraid to run away. They're afraid to tell someone. They're brainwashed, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, has there been any evolution in any kind of authorities that can assist when the trafficking is identified? Like, how is that relations? How are those relations?
Yeah, one thing that Shared Hope International is trying to do, as well as other groups, organizations, is train law enforcement,
Mm.
because it is felt that a lot of law enforcement people really, I mean, they're like so many people in the general population, they don't really understand exactly what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really understand who the victims are. And um, one thing that is being pushed for in this country is to go after the buyers of sex, not just the sellers, who are, of course, the traffickers, but to go after the buyers, because as long as there is that demand, then there is going to be the sex trafficking. And if we can teach these our men and boys, and we can't forget that boys are also trafficked as well. But if we can, I think a lot of people, these men who do buy sex, don't realize that these are actually victims of trafficking, that they're not doing this willingly. Um, if a victim does not bring in a certain amount of money every day, then that victim may be beaten as a punishment. Um, so it's like they're caught up in something that they it's very, very difficult to get
Mm.
out.
Mm. So,
Um,
are you uncovering any clues to the potential buyers? Have we gotten to the source of that financing?
well, potential buyers can essentially be anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, the large majority of buyers are men, of course. And some of the large sports events that we have in this country, like the Super Bowl and the Kentucky Derby and all of those big sports events, the traffickers will take their victims
Mm-hmm.
to these events. And then, of course, the men who attend these events are, many of them are buyers of sex.
Right.
And
Mm.
so in this country, there's a big push to go after the buyers and not just the traffickers, and put them behind bars, but also go after the buyers, and that is beginning to happen in this country.
Mm-hmm. And if I'm correct, you mentioned that the United States is actually demonstrating the most trafficking upon the planet right now. Is that correct?
Well, the United States is one of the top destination countries,
Mm.
which you, in order sex trafficking happens all over the globe.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of women and girls and boys who are being brought into this country
Right.
simply because there are so many people here, men here in this country, who will buy these
Mm.
victims.
Right.
And some victims, if I can just mention this statistic, some victims are bought, if you want to use that term, anywhere from 5 to 50 times a day. That's one person,
Right.
one person.
Right.
And
Okay.
like, it's $1 billion industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's money that's
Yeah. Follow
driving.
the money. Follow the money. You find out where the trail is leads to. And you had also, I know we maybe just skimmed over it, but that trafficking, I believe you listed, it's also in labor, it's
Yes.
in, right? If you could just name all those areas that this trafficking, other aspects that it's happening in.
Yes, it can happen in restaurants. They could be dishwashers. They could be in hotels, in the janitorial services. They could be in nail salons. In Thailand, one of the big labor trafficking areas is the fishing industry. Um, there's agriculture where people are sent to go work out in the fields on these big farms, and it can really essentially be anywhere. Domestic um, labor can include things like maids and nannies in individual people's homes. Um, I know that there was, at least one case where a family had essentially kind of like a butler, and they had invited some people over for dinner one night, and one of the young women who was a guest strongly suspected that this butler was actually a victim of human trafficking, and called authorities, and they came out and investigated, and he was rescued. Wow. So.
Oh, wow. Well, Karen, we're coming to the close of this interview, but what I'd like to go is as an ambassador of hope, is to give us some messages of hope right now. Because as you know, this is very challenging information. It's necessary information. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful to the likes of you and all the people in the world who fearlessly are turning these stones over. And so right now, as a voice of hope, would you please share some messages with us?
Well, as I said in the beginning, when I talk to audiences, I tell them, I wish I were here to tell you how to grow a better flower garden. Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, I kind of am, because we can look at our children as the flowers. And what we need to do is we need to educate ourselves about this very fast-growing crime. We need to educate our children so that when they do go out into the world, that they have more tools to keep themselves safe. I think that by sharing the message, spreading the word, because I have discovered in a lot of cases, people look at me like, huh, what, trafficking here? Yeah, does it occur in this city? And yeah, it does. So education, we need to teach our children, our boys, our men, we need to teach children that the bottom line here is that we are all human beings, and every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And I think that we're kind of losing some of that in our families and in our schools, and but I think a lot of it goes back to education. And I tell everybody in this room can be a lifesaver. So learn the signs of trafficking. Know what to do if you suspect it. In this country, there are several numbers that you can call if you suspect someone is being trafficked. I give those numbers out. I tell people to put the National Human Trafficking Hotline number in their cell phone, and not just do that, but to memorize it. And if you see something suspicious, call the number. I've called it twice. It will be answered by a real live person, and they will take the situation. You tell them where you are, what you're seeing, and they'll take it from there. But we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate our children. And as I said, our children need to learn that we are all different, but those differences are not deficits, that we are all human beings All human beings deserve to be treated with kindness, dignity, respect. And that by spreading the message, you could actually save a life. And I tell people, one person, one child in trafficking is one too many. And if I save one life, only one, then I will feel that my life and my time here on this planet has been worth it.
That is so beautiful. I've got chills going through my body. I totally feel your heart and passion. And this one note that you just ended on, that one person, we underestimate how potent and powerful it is that if we can reach one person,
Yes.
that is amazing. And when I visualize those beautiful images we see often now, people holding hands all the way around the planet.
Yes.
One person after another one person.
And if I may end with one of my favorite quotes.
Absolutely.
And I cannot even tell you who said this, I'm sorry, but it's to the world, you are just one person. But to one person, you may be the world.
Blessed be.
Yes, blessed be. Thank you so much, Blue Star Gentleman, for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you too, Karen. And I will, once we come closure here, I'm going to contact you again just to chat a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Love to everyone. And may we all be in peace and happiness together.
Yes. Amen.
Namaste.
Namaste.